Hello, and welcome to the What If South is Up podcast. Regrettably, we do not have a normal episode for you this week, due to some unfortunately timed health issues among our staff, but given the timing and the date, we felt it might be appropriate to offer you a sneak peek into our very own Derrick Hall's, my, upcoming novella, Berylis. And this follows a character that, if you have read Qetran Odyssey, you may be familiar with. She is what would be considered a side character, but has a lot of heart, and is very often a reader favorite. There was one line in Qetran Revival, Book 2, which is releasing in May, that kind of stuck in my head and made me want to create something more with this character. I wanted to know more about her, I wanted to know more of her past, and not being a planner, I learn about my characters as they grow. And that is what this was. It was an exercise in growth, and I wanted to learn more about these characters as much as my readers did, so that is why I have this coming. It's not super long, the whole thing is a little over 100 pages, and it's an easy read. It's a good one for a car ride over spring break or something like that, and the release is timed accordingly. So this is an excerpt from Berylis, which will be available on Amazon beginning April 10th, 2023, in Kindle and paperback formats. Kindle versions are available now for pre-order if you want to get ahead of the queue and make sure you have a copy on launch day. So without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 7. Perspective. Berylis gazed at her companion across the round wooden table. No, you just have to look at it from a different perspective. The only perspective I have is my own. Her companion looked at her with confusion written across his lank features. That is your failure. There are more perspectives than just your own, but you must be willing to learn from someone else and develop the understanding and ability to see them. The world must realize that their singular, unique perspective is not and cannot be the only one. However unfavorable it may be, compromise is required to make the world better. Compromise requires change, and that change must start within themselves. It takes time and effort to gain a different view. You make a fair point, but I think it's harder for some people than you realize. Berylis shook her head. The whole situation reminded her far too much of her training with Master Adonius. It was years ago now, but his lessons still held their place in the front of her mind. She hadn't quite understood the concept either. Not until he sat down with her and showed her the different points of view contained within his vast library. But if she could learn to see another point of view, a new perspective, surely anyone else could, even this foppish fool. Duke Kelda, the man sitting across the table from her, was a member of the minor nobility and a diplomatic functionary that served underneath the ruler of Berylis, Archon Dimitri. His lackluster name was befitting of his lackluster appearance, being a bit too fat to be called skinny and a bit too skinny to be called fat, while still appearing pale and overall wholly unhealthy. All I ask is that my proposal is considered, Berylis stated, and rose from the table. The dress that she was forced to wear in such company felt as though it were made of both too much fabric and too little, and at best she thought it to be cumbersome, and at worst, given the seasonal heat of Berylis, dangerous. How women dealt with such atrocities on a daily basis was beyond her, and it was no wonder they were prone to fainting at the slightest provocation. Your words will not be cast aside out of spite, I assure you. Kelda stood and dipped into a low bow. However, I cannot say whether or not your advice will be heeded. Consideration is enough, Duke Kelda. Thank you for your time. Berylis left the meeting room and was escorted to the exit of the Archon's sprawling palace. The dress again proved a hindrance, tripping her up on several occasions as she made her way down the wide steps and across the boulevard. The palace fronted a large public garden, overshadowed by trees and tangled with footpaths. A few yards into the park, a large mountain lion suddenly descended from the canopy to follow along at her side. Did it work? The lion asked, as the words echoed in Berylis's mind for only her to hear. Of course not. Talk is useless with these people. Did you at least speak with the Archon? No, they gave me a sallow lump of a man instead, as forgettable as he is useless. I'm afraid that nothing will come of it, Qetir. You afraid? Here I was thinking you wanted this outcome. I do. We should have skipped this whole mess and finished the mission weeks ago." The pair turned onto a smaller footpath lined with crushed stones, and Berylis entered the small shed used to house gardening tools and supplies. She wasted no time stripping off the bodice and complicated array of skirts. She didn't even bother to untie the laces, choosing instead to extend one of the retractable claws that she had gained through her familiar bond with Qetran and cut them. The damage to the frivolous garment didn't bother her in the slightest. "Then we go to the next plan?" Qetran asked, silently licking between the pads of one of his paws. "We go to the next plan," Berylis confirmed. She pulled her usual clothes, plain leggings and a form-fitting sleeveless shirt, from the leather bag that she had stashed earlier and pulled them on. She retrieved her black dagger from the bag as well and strapped it to the small of her back. The various components of the dress she crumpled into a ball and deposited into a compost bin attached to the outside of the shack. The next plan was both more and less subtle than the first. If talking didn't work, then action was required. That's how things were supposed to be done, at least. "Talking never works. I don't know why we can't just go straight to the action and skip the useless bits," Berylis complained as she made her way through the streets with Qetran. "Not never. It worked in a dry." "One time. And are you forgetting that a dry was 3 years ago?" "I do not forget, though I may lose track occasionally," Qetran admitted. "So how do you want to do it?" And the pair rounded the corner of a small lake that lay overshadowed by trees. "You make it sound so nefarious. Need I remind you that we are here to topple the largest shipping conglomerate in Qetran? Our intentions are nefarious." Berylis stifled a laugh. "Shipping conglomerate? Is that what you want to call it?" "Conglomerate, unified Qetran Navy, same difference." Qetran hopped lightly atop the low stone wall that lined the path and continued to walk with Berylis. The few people scattered around the vicinity, mostly rich-looking couples out for an afternoon stroll, scattered at the sight of the big cat, but he paid them no heed. Berylis didn't either, for that matter. Ever since she had bonded with him 7 years ago, they had barely been apart for more than a few hours. She was used to the unusual and often panicked reactions to her familiar. However, several of the effects of their bond, such as Qetran's ability to speak and her retractable claws, drew even more attention than the presence of a mountain lion in otherwise civilized company, and were generally relegated to more private settings, or more dramatic ones, whichever proved to be most advantageous. Berylis and Qetran had spent the better part of a month in Berylis, flitting from one ill-fated meeting to another in an attempt to influence naval policy away from regulating the slave trade and more toward abolishing it altogether. The Navy, of course, had no interest in taking such a stance, as defense was a minor concern when compared to the coin that the slave taxes brought in. Her next steps had been to petition the Velician government directly, her ultimate goal being a meeting with the Archon himself, but that had been an equal waste of her efforts. Her audience request had bounced her from one useless government official to the next, eventually leading to her meeting with the supremely useless Duke Kelda, and cementing in her mind that it was time to stop playing at diplomacy and take action. She had a plan, of course. Master Adonius had taught her early on that Plan B, being the fallback, should be accounted for first rather than second. He always told her to plan for the worst and hope for the best, and that was what she had done even before her arrival in Berylis. Tonight was the grand ball of the unified Qetran Navy, and she had invited herself to the party. No fancy dress required. Berylis and Qetran passed out of the park on the far side and soon turned into a narrow alley lined with wagons and ox carts filled to the brim with all manner of supplies bound for the ball. "You're late!" A burly, shirtless man with an objectively gross excess of body hair waved a book at her. "Sorry, boss, I got tied up. It won't happen again." "It better not! I told you to leave that damned cat at home," he finished. Berylis ignored him and twisted her way into a crowd of workers. She collected a crate from a stack near the back doors of the warehouse and carried it to the nearest cart. The boss was all bark and not the sort of man to be feared despite his bluster. The job, on the other hand, was purely for cover, so she had no investment in it beyond today. With the crates loaded, Berylis took her place next to the driver of the rearmost cart. Quite the load today. The driver was also from one of the desert tribes, though she was unfamiliar with which, and bore a mark of indenture rather than the collar that a lot of the others working with the delivery crew wore. "You know how the rich like to play," Berylis responded and rolled her eyes. "Frivolous arseholes." "You said it." The line had begun moving, and the driver snapped the reins across the back of their ox, who lowed in protest but began pulling the overladen cart ponderously forward. They followed a wide thoroughfare and then turned down a series of progressively narrower streets and approached the rear service entrance to the naval headquarters. Each wagon was inspected by guards and waved through into the courtyard one at a time. Berylis and all the others hopped down and began unloading the wagons. Berylis, for her part, chose a crate filled with bottles of Velician brandy and, rather than stacking it with the rest, slipped through the back door and into the kitchens. As she expected, the kitchens were consumed in a chaotic frenzy of activity. There were people everywhere, and all of them seemed to be shouting into the void as they went about their work. The whole scene was overwhelming, and in the chaos, no one paid her any particular mind. Most of the way through the kitchen, Berylis set down her crate next to a stack of similar parcels and glanced over her shoulder. Still unnoticed, she pulled an apron from its hook on the wall, slipped the loop over her head, and tied it around her waist. She weaved through the writhing mass of kitchen workers, grabbing a handful of flour as she passed the bakers and spread it over the apron, just one step closer to disappearing into the environment. She worked through the crowds, doing her best to look busy until she was able to leave the kitchens behind. A side room, hidden away in a largely ignored corner of the building, served as a locker room and allowed members of the staff to change clothes, but also doubled as a laundry. Berylis peeked through the gap in the door, which hung ajar, and when she found it deserted, slipped inside. It was here that she found what she really needed, and her apron was soon discarded in favor of a freshly pressed waiter's suit. The outfit was starched within an inch of its life, and the collar in particular could have cut cold butter without flinching. The fit, however uncomfortable, was adequate, and once her mane of silver hair was tied back, she felt she looked the part. "If you're done preening, there is work to do," Qetran reminded her. "You groom your coat 5 times a day, and I'm preening?" she shot back. "A marvelous observation. My grooming habits are not in question at the moment, though." Berylis couldn't help but smile. His response was practically dripping with sarcasm to the point that it became almost tangible. A side effect of their bond and the mental link through which they communicated was that emotion was carried much more openly than in normal speech, and was also much harder to hide. "I'll do my job, you just do whatever you're supposed to be doing." "Yes, of course! How could I forget the pivotal role of wait here and be ready for trouble?" "Qetran." "I'll wait, though." "Qetran." My, well, that is a complication." Qetran paused for a heavy moment. "Your mission may have just gotten easier." "May have?" "Or a lot more difficult." "What in the hells are you talking about?" Berylis tapped her foot, growing impatient with her familiar's cryptic language. "Dravos is here." "Oh." That did complicate things. I hope you've enjoyed this reading from the Crimson Prophecy novella Berylis by Derrick Hall. This will be releasing on April 10th, as we mentioned before, and if you would like to pick up a copy of this or any of Derrick's other books, they are available on Amazon through the link in the description below. Thank you for listening, and we will return to our normal episodes of What If in April. Have a good one, everybody.